Imagine you could hold the entire global economy hostage, not with a nuclear weapon, not with a cyber attack, but with a strip of water narrower than the English Channel. 21 miles. That's it. That's the distance between the southern coast of Iran and the tip of Oman's Muzandam Peninsula. And through that gap, every single day, roughly 21 million barrels of oil slide past on tanker ships the length of skyscrapers. If that flow stops, even for a week, gas prices explode overnight, stock markets crash, and the gears of modern civilization grind to a halt. This is the Strait of Hormuz. And for 3,000 years, whoever has controlled these waters has held a knife to the throat of the world. This isn't just a story about oil. It's a story about empires rising and falling, about ancient trade routes and modern missile batteries, about a geographic accident that has shaped more of human history than almost any other place on Earth. Let's go back to the beginning. Long before anyone dreamed of oil, the Persian Gulf was already one of the most important bodies of water on Earth. Around 3000 BCE, the Sumerians, builders of the world's first cities in what is now southern Iraq, wrote about a paradise called Dilmun. It was a land of sweet water and abundant trade, almost certainly located on the island of Bahrain and the surrounding Gulf Coast. And to reach the wider Indian Ocean, every Sumerian merchant vessel had to pass through the strait. Copper from Oman, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, timber from the Indus Valley. All of it funneled through these waters. The Akkadian Empire, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, each successive Mesopotamian power understood that controlling Gulf trade meant controlling wealth itself. Ancient clay tablets from your described shipments of gold, carnelian, and ivory moving through the Gulf in volumes that would rival modern commodity markets. The strait wasn't yet a military flashpoint, but it was already a bottleneck. And bottlenecks, as history teaches us again and again, are where power concentrates. Then came the Persians, and everything changed. When Cyrus the Great founded the Achaemenid Empire around 550 BCE, he didn't just conquer Babylon. He inherited the entire Gulf trade network. His successors, Darius and Xerxes, turned the Persian Gulf into what was essentially an imperial lake. Persian naval bases dotted the coastline. Warships patrolled these waters. And the strait became, for the first time, a deliberately militarized choke point. Darius the Great was especially strategic. He commissioned a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, an ancient precursor to the Suez Canal, specifically to link his Mediterranean territories to his Gulf trade routes. He understood something that would take European powers another 2,000 years to grasp: whoever controls the waterways between East and West controls the flow of civilization itself. The Greek historian Nearchus, serving under Alexander the Great, sailed through the Strait of Hormuz in 326 BCE and described the coast of modern-day Iran and Oman in vivid detail. Alexander dreamed of making the Gulf the centerpiece of a global trading empire. He died before he could. But the dream didn't die with him. Fast forward to the medieval period, and the strait gets its name. By the 10th century CE, a small kingdom called the Kingdom of Hormuz had risen on the island of Hormuz, perched right at the mouth of the strait. And it became fabulously, almost absurdly wealthy. Arab and Persian merchants turned Hormuz into a global marketplace. Marco Polo visited in 1293 and described it as one of the greatest trading ports in the world, a place where spices from India, silk from China, horses from Arabia, and pearls from the Gulf floor all changed hands. He also called the heat unbearable and the food terrible, but that's beside the point. The real point is this: Hormuz was the hinge between the Indian Ocean and the Middle East, and by extension, Europe. The Venetian spice trade, the wealth that built the Italian Renaissance, all of it depended on goods that passed through this strait. Ibn Battuta, the great Moroccan explorer, called the island a jewel on the ring of the world. And he wasn't exaggerating. At its peak, the Kingdom of Hormuz controlled trade worth what would be billions in today's money. And then, in 1507, the cannons came. Afonso de Albuquerque, the ruthless Portuguese naval commander, sailed into the Strait of Hormuz with a fleet of warships and did something no European had ever done before: he seized control of the Gulf's gateway by force. The Portuguese assault on Hormuz was brutal. Albuquerque burned ships in the harbor, massacred defenders, and constructed a massive stone fortress, the Fort of Our Lady of the Conception, right on Hormuz Island. He reportedly told his king, "If we can control Hormuz, Goa, and Malacca, we can control all the trade of the East." He was right. Those three choke points formed a triangle of naval dominance that gave tiny Portugal, a country with barely 1 million people, control over the richest trade routes on the planet. For over a century, the Portuguese extracted tolls from every ship that passed through the strait. They didn't need to conquer the entire Middle East. They just needed to hold the door. It was one of the earliest and most brilliant demonstrations of choke point strategy in modern history. But empires are jealous things, and the Portuguese wouldn't hold this door forever. In 1622, the Safavid Persians, with help from the English East India Company, drove the Portuguese out of Hormuz. It was a pivotal moment. The English didn't take the island for themselves, not yet, but they had planted a flag in the region's power dynamics. And they would not leave for 300 years. By the 19th century, the British Empire had turned the Persian Gulf into what diplomats bluntly called a British lake. The Royal Navy patrolled these waters with unchallenged supremacy. Britain signed a series of treaties with the small Arab sheikdoms along the southern coast, what they called the Trucial States, which would eventually become the United Arab Emirates. These weren't equal partnerships. They were arrangements that gave Britain total control over foreign policy and defense in exchange for protection. And the strait? It was the lock on the door. British naval bases at Aden, Bahrain, and Muscat formed an iron triangle around the Gulf's entrance. Any threat to British shipping, piracy, rival empires, local rebellions, was met with overwhelming naval force. The British understood what the Persians, the Portuguese, and the Arabs had all learned: you don't need to own the Gulf. You just need to own the 21 miles that connect it to the rest of the world. And then, in 1908, something happened that would transform the Strait of Hormuz from strategically important to existentially critical. British geologist George Reynolds struck oil at Masjed Soliman in southwestern Iran. It was the first major oil discovery in the Middle East, and it changed everything. Suddenly, the Persian Gulf wasn't just a trade corridor, it was sitting on top of the largest concentration of petroleum reserves on the planet. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, the UAE, Qatar. Together, these Gulf states held, and still hold, nearly half the world's proven oil reserves. And there is only one way to get that oil to the global market: by sea, through the Strait of Hormuz. By the mid-20th century, the stakes had become almost incomprehensible. The entire post-World War II economic order, the rise of the automobile, suburban sprawl, industrial agriculture, global aviation, all of it ran on Gulf oil. Winston Churchill had converted the Royal Navy from coal to oil in 1911, betting Britain's military future on petroleum. Now every major economy on Earth had made the same bet. And all of those bets passed through one 21-mile gap. For decades, the threat of the strait being closed remained theoretical. Then, in the 1980s, the theory became reality. The Iran-Iraq War, which raged from 1980 to 1988, spilled directly into the Persian Gulf in what became known as the Tanker War. It started when Iraq, unable to break Iran on land, began attacking Iranian oil tankers and terminals to strangle Iran's economy. Iran retaliated by attacking tankers carrying Iraqi allied oil from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Between 1984 and 1988, more than 450 ships were attacked. Oil tankers, those massive, slow-moving vessels with hulls full of crude, became floating targets. Missiles streaked across the water. Mines drifted in the shipping lanes. Sailors died. The world panicked. Oil prices spiked. And the United States stepped in with Operation Earnest Will, the largest naval convoy operation since World War II. American warships escorted reflagged Kuwaiti tankers through the strait, daring Iran to fire on a US-flagged vessel. On April 18, 1988, after the frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine, the U.S. Navy launched Operation Praying Mantis, the largest American naval battle since 1945, destroying half of Iran's operational navy in a single day. The message was clear: the strait would stay open, no matter the cost. Today, the Strait of Hormuz remains the most dangerous flashpoint in global geopolitics, and Iran holds the most terrifying cards. Over the past 2 decades, Iran has built what military analysts call an anti-access, area denial network around the strait. Fast attack boats armed with missiles, shore-based anti-ship cruise missiles, thousands of sea mines stockpiled in coastal bunkers, submarines lurking in the shallow waters, and perhaps most importantly, a doctrine of asymmetric warfare designed specifically to make closing the strait as easy and as painful as possible. Iran has never been shy about this. In 2012, during tensions over its nuclear program, Iranian military commanders publicly threatened to close the strait if sanctions strangled their economy. The US Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain just miles away, responded that any closure would be met with force. In 2019, Iran shot down a US surveillance drone over the strait and seized a British-flagged oil tanker. The world held its breath. A full-scale confrontation seemed minutes away. The math is terrifying. Even a temporary closure, just a few weeks, could remove 20% of the global oil supply from the market overnight. Analysts estimate oil prices could triple. The global economic damage could run into the trillions. So you might be wondering, if this strait is so dangerous, why doesn't the world just build a workaround? Pipeline the oil overland. Bypass the choke point entirely. It sounds simple. It's not. Saudi Arabia does have a partial bypass, the East-West Pipeline, which can carry about 5 million barrels a day to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. The UAE built the Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which bypasses the strait entirely and can move about 1.5 million barrels a day. But together, these alternatives can handle maybe 6 or 7 million barrels. That's roughly a third of what flows through Hormuz daily. The gap is enormous. Building more pipelines means crossing hundreds of miles of desert, negotiating with multiple governments, and spending tens of billions of dollars, all to replace a sea route that, most of the time, works just fine. And here's the deeper problem: it's not just oil. Liquefied natural gas from Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter, also passes through the strait. So does trade going to and from Iraq, Kuwait, and Bahrain. The strait isn't just an oil choke point. It's an everything choke point. Geography has created a problem that engineering alone cannot solve. There's one more twist to this story, and it's happening right now. The global energy transition. As the world slowly shifts towards solar, wind, and electric vehicles, you might think the Strait of Hormuz will lose its strategic importance. And eventually, decades from now, it might. But in the near term, the opposite is actually true. The energy transition requires enormous amounts of petrochemicals, plastics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals that are still derived from oil and gas. Developing nations in Asia, particularly India and China, are actually increasing their oil imports even as Europe begins to reduce them. China now imports roughly 75% of its oil, and the vast majority of it passes through Hormuz. As one analyst put it, the Strait of Hormuz isn't becoming less important. It's becoming important to different people. And there's a geopolitical irony here. As the United States has become more energy independent thanks to shale oil, its strategic motivation to police the strait has weakened, even as China's dependence on it has grown. The question of who keeps the strait open in the 21st century is one of the defining strategic puzzles of our time. 3,000 years. Sumerian merchants. Persian kings. Portuguese admirals. British imperialists. American aircraft carriers. Iranian missile batteries. The players change. The technology changes. The cargo changes, from copper and spices to crude oil and liquefied gas. But the geography never changes. 21 miles of water between two rocky coastlines. That's all it's ever been. And that's the terrifying lesson of the Strait of Hormuz. We like to believe that technology liberates us from geography, that in an age of satellites and cyberspace, physical bottlenecks shouldn't matter anymore. But they do. They matter more than ever. Because the more connected and interdependent our global economy becomes, the more devastating it is when a single point of failure is threatened. The Strait of Hormuz is a reminder that civilization, for all its complexity, still runs on very simple things: narrow waterways, fossil fuels, and the fragile agreements that keep ships moving through the night. If this video made you think differently about a place you may never have heard of before, drop a like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, do you think the Strait will still matter in 50 years? I'd love to hear your take. Until next time.